Hi, this is Barry here, and you're very, very welcome to today's podcast episode from WriteCome.com. And today I want to ask you a very thought-provoking question, because when I heard it yesterday, it did made me stop and think for a few moments. And the question is, who would you die for? Now, I know this probably seems like a bit of a morbid podcast episode asking you a question like that from the very, very beginning, but stick with me because it'll make sense to you, and, it'll actually make you maybe consider what you're doing in your own life. So, for example, if I asked you that question, who would you die for? I assume probably in the next second, somebody has come straight to your mind, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a child, whether it's a grandchild or whatever it is, but somebody straight away comes to mind. Somebody who you would race into a burning house for, someone who, if they needed a blood transfusion or a kidney transplant or something, you would be there and you'd be the first person to put your name on the list because you would do anything for that person. In my own case, I remember many years ago, I think it was maybe 11 or 12. I remember I used to help out my father during the summer holidays when, I was free from school. And, at that stage, I was probably wrecking my mother's head and she wanted rid of me for a couple of hours every day. So my father was a truck driver. So what I would do is I would help him in the trucks and, if it need be, I would help him maybe handle all the, the goods that was in the containers. And if we had to take it off by hand, if there was no forklift around, we would, do it by hand. And, for those... it kept me busy in the summer holidays and kept me out of trouble. And, I enjoyed spending my time with my dad like that. And, but one day, we had a large container. I think it was a 40-foot container, and it was full of all, parts for coaches and buses. And, part of the load was, all the coach seats. And, of course, me being kind of small and, not as strong as the other men that was helping out that day, I was given the task of, dragging out the coach seats. And they weren't too big. There was kind of a single coach seat. They weren't actually like a double or triple size one. So I could just simply grab it and I could drag it the full length of the container until I got to the very end, and then somebody else would take it off me. So, of course, me being 10 or 11, I was, full of myself, and, I was the big man, and I was working with all these other big men. And I was proud of myself, at that moment, the way kids are, and, trying to be the big man. But as I was doing the seats, my father and another man, they were lifting these kind of metal plates. Now, maybe they might have been maybe 2 or 3 feet in length, but these were the kind of heavy metal plates that clamped the bus seats to the bus, so they wouldn't move around. And, at the time I watched my dad, they were very, very heavy. I don't know how heavy they were, or if they were in bundles at the time. I'm not too sure what way they were, but I do know that my father couldn't carry the bars on his own. He had to work with a man. So they were all working in pairs and they were carrying these bars off the container anyway. And it came to a stage where I was working further up on the container on my own, and there was a seat that was trapped behind these bars. So rather than me asking for help and, trying to be the big man, I tugged and tugged on this coach seat anyway, and whatever way it was caught in the bars, I pulled a section, like a bundle of these bars, and straight away they fell down and landed on my legs. Now, of course, I was terrified straight away because, at the time, my legs were probably like 2 toothpicks, and I never even thought about them being broken or whatever, but I just couldn't move. It was as if somebody just welded me to the spot, and I looked up and here was all these metal bars, and my legs were trapped and you could just see my 2 feet sticking out of the other end. So straight away I screamed to my father to come for help, and in an instant he was there beside me, and of course he's seen what was happening. But I watched him grab all those metal bars, and he grabbed them one by one and he flung them back aside to uncover my legs and pull me out. So once he was finished that, then he put me standing up and he dusted me down and had me look over, and straight away he assumed that my 2 legs were broken, which I didn't really think about at the time. But as a parent now, that was probably, if that happened to one of my kids, I would probably be the same. But I was in shock at the time for a while, but when I thought about it later on, it just made me realize what he had done for me in that few seconds. Like, a few minutes before, like, I watched him work with another man and they were working in pairs because they were so heavy. But in those few seconds, like when I was trapped under those bars, he grabbed those things and he threw them away as if they were just made of, balsa wood or some kind of, paper, that was cardboard. They just tossed them away to uncover me from those things. And his mind was totally focused on me, and it wasn't, focused on whether he could do it. He wanted to get them off me as quick as possible. And in that moment, like, I don't know what it opened up, whether it was adrenaline, whether it opened up strength that was in him that wasn't there before, or, you know, totally, his mindset was just focused on me and it wasn't focused on him. So in those few seconds, like, he did whatever he could, you know, to do that. And we've seen probably stories in the press and the news before where maybe a housewife or just some normal woman, you know, that maybe has never lifted a weight in her life, suddenly just lifts up a car and pulls a child out of it, or, you know, a man runs into a burning building, or a woman, or, you know, somebody does something that just seems so far, you know, beyond their abilities. And, like, you know, to ask you, like, would you die for that person, you would probably, you know, do any of those things. But if I turn that question on its head today, and if I said to you, who would you live for? Again, you would probably say, well, I would, you know, that grandchild, or my son, or my daughter, my spouse, you know, I would do anything for them. I would live for them. And yet most of us, you know, most of us aren't doing that. Most of us aren't living for our spouse or our child or whatever. You know, take a look at those people maybe who are a little bit over obese, who aren't paying attention to the food that they're eating. You know, all that weight gain over time is going to leave them with less time with that child in the future. Maybe they're cutting off years of their life because of the way they're eating. You know, you're going to find somebody else maybe who's going into the local betting shop and who's going to put on maybe a week's wage on a horse, you know, and then don't consider, you know, their wife and their kids. We're going to have somebody maybe who's, you know, who's a chain smoker, who's just smoking like a train, you know, and who isn't considering, you know, that the fact that maybe that they won't be around for their daughter's wedding and they won't be there to give her away. You know, same for us too. Maybe we'll put excuses of why we can't do something, you know, why we're stupid, why we can't run a home-based business, why we'll never be a writer, why we haven't got what it takes to write a book, you know, why we, you know, we don't have the ability or the brains or whatever it is to have a better financial future. And because we are, you know, living in our own bubble, we just, for us, you know, we've said we'd live for that person, we would do anything for that person. And yet by our actions, you know, we're doing the complete opposite for it. You know, we're neglecting our health. You know, we're cutting ourselves short. We're not pushing ourselves to, you know, create that home business, to write that book, to do something. And, you know, for a lot of us, you know, like my father did there, like he did anything for me. In that moment, like, his last concern was his, you know, his inability to lift those bars and all that, you know, because his mind was solely focused on me. So whatever you're doing today, you know, whatever you're holding yourself back on, however you think you're stupid, you look, when you look at it too, like, my father had that strength all along. It was already in him, and it just needed something to fire it up, and not to be focused on himself, but to be focused on me. And it opened up that reservoir of strength, or whatever it was that he had already in him. And, you know, when you're focused on yourself and you're doing things for yourself, sometimes, you know, it's easy to get swayed. You know, your motivation gets swayed by maybe a box set on Netflix, or, you know, maybe that piece of cake or something that you just, you know, it's just calling to you, and it's very easy to just say, oh, I'll just focus on the diet tomorrow and I'll have this piece of cake now. But, like, if you were doing that for that other person, if you're doing it for that loved one in your life, I'm sure you would just pick that piece of cake and you toss it in the bin. I'm sure you would disregard that, you know, that moment where you doubted yourself, that you're, you know, for example, even doing a podcast, you know, you'll probably say to yourself, well, I haven't got what it takes to create a podcast or do what you're doing. But I would say to you, you know, you're thinking of yourself. You know, what if you had to do a podcast for your child? What if, you know, you had to do an episode every day for the next 30 days and you had to do it for your child? You know, if you focused on them instead of actually the lack and the limitations you're putting on yourself, you know, you would do far, far more for them. So whatever you're doing today, whatever way you're questioning yourself, whatever way you're doubting yourself, thinking that you can't do this and you can't do that, you know, stop doing it for yourself. You know, do it for someone else. You know, as I'm doing this podcast here, you know, this past couple of weeks, I've got a goal in mind, and it's a goal it's not for me, it's for my wife, and it's for my kids. And, you know, that goal is what gets me up every morning, gets me up, you know, first thing in the morning before I take the kids to school. It's the first thing that, you know, it fires me up, that I go and I write my daily email, that I do my blog post, that I do my social media images, I do the podcast, I do video. And, you know, if I focused on, if I was just doing it for myself, you know, it's very easy for me just to turn over in the bed and lie on for another hour or two and, you know, say, well, I'll do it later, I'll put it later. But the fact that I'm not doing it for myself, that I'm doing it for them, that I'm building something for the future for my kids and for my wife, because, you know, I want, you know, something better for them than what they're experiencing at the moment. Not saying that we're having a bad experience at the moment, far from it, compared to some people in the world. But I'm putting them first, and it's them that's motivating me to do that. So whatever you're doing today, if you are lacking focus, if you're putting off things because you're looking at you, why not do it for somebody else? Because they would rather see you doing more with your life than to give it up for them. They would rather see you be around, in 10, 15 years from now, rather than, you sitting on the couch, pigging out, watching TV and box sets and, putting on weight and all those different things, or, smoking like a train or whatever it is. So focus on them instead. And I'm sure, you're going to open up, talents and all these things that, these limitations that you have on yourself at the moment that are holding you back. So do it for somebody else today. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. I really enjoyed putting together, and actually I want to give full credit to Jamie Alderton, who gave me the idea for this. It was one of Jamie's stories on his Instagram account, and I highly recommend that you if you have a chance to find Jamie's podcast on iTunes. It's Mindset with Muscle, and I recommend that you subscribe to it and listen to it, because Jamie has a lot of great information. Although he is a personal trainer and he's he owns a gym owner and stuff like that, Jamie is a lot into mindset and stuff like that too. So you will learn a lot from that podcast if you're interested in subscribing to it. So again, thank you for sharing your time with me today. It's been great, and if you enjoyed this episode, please, if you would really help me out if you could go over to iTunes and leave a quick review, because the more reviews I have over there, it helps with the algorithm, and the more people that will find this podcast. And if you find this helpful, they will probably find it helpful too, and they'd probably appreciate you for doing that thing. I know I would. So as always, take care, have a great day, and whatever you're doing, do it for someone else today. Bye-bye.